Emily and Mark had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. To neighbors and friends, they were the kind of couple people admired, steady, affectionate, and successful. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where lawns were neatly trimmed and families gathered for weekend barbecues. Their two-story home stood at the end of the street, glowing warmly at night, with flower pots by the porch and framed family photos on every wall. Emily was a nurse at the local hospital, known for her calm and gentle nature, while Mark owned a small but growing construction business. They had been married for 7 years, and though their life wasn't without its usual ups and downs, Emily believed it was built on trust. Everything began to change the day her mother, Linda, moved in with them. Linda had recently gone through a messy divorce. She was heartbroken, lonely, and in need of stability. Emily, being the caring daughter she was, insisted that her mother stay with them for a while until she could get back on her feet. Mark agreed without hesitation, reassuring Emily that it would be nice to have someone else in the house. At first, everything seemed fine. Linda spent her days gardening, cooking, and helping around the house. She laughed more, seemed happier, and often thanked Emily for her kindness. Mark was supportive and always offered to help Linda with errands or repairs. It looked like a peaceful arrangement, at least at the beginning. As weeks went by, Emily began to notice subtle shifts that she couldn't explain. Her husband, who used to spend most evenings watching TV with her, now often stayed up late in the living room. He claimed he was catching up on paperwork for his company, but when Emily passed by, he would quickly close his laptop. Sometimes she would hear soft laughter coming from the room, only to find her mother there, sitting too close to him on the couch. They would both greet her with forced smiles, acting casual, as if nothing strange was happening. The air in the house began to feel different, heavy, uneasy, filled with tension that no one spoke about. Linda also started changing. She began paying more attention to her appearance, wearing perfume every evening, styling her hair, and buying new clothes. She claimed she just wanted to feel confident again after her divorce, and Emily believed her at first. But one night, Emily came home from work earlier than expected. As she entered the house, she caught a glimpse of Linda quickly adjusting her robe and Mark rushing out of the kitchen, both looking startled. They said they were just talking, but something about the scene felt wrong. Emily brushed it off, telling herself she was imagining things. After all, these were the two people she trusted most in her life. Still, uneasiness lingered. Emily began to notice other details. Mark's shirts occasionally carried the faint scent of Linda's perfume, and once she found a lipstick stain on a glass he had been drinking from when Linda was home alone with him. She told herself it was just a coincidence. Yet her instincts whispered otherwise. She began to feel like a stranger in her own home, moving quietly through rooms filled with secrets. She tried to convince herself that she was just being paranoid, but each passing day made it harder to ignore. One evening, while folding laundry, Emily found something that shattered her calm. Hidden inside one of Mark's pockets was a receipt for a gold bracelet, a piece she had never seen before. When she asked about it casually, Mark smiled and said it was a surprise for her upcoming birthday. But her birthday had already passed 2 weeks earlier. She didn't say anything then, but her heart began to ache with suspicion. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was happening behind her back. Soon after, Mark's behavior became more distant. He no longer showed the same warmth toward Emily. He avoided eye contact, gave short answers, and seemed distracted even during dinner. At the same time, Linda became strangely protective of him. Whenever Emily complained about his coldness, her mother defended him, saying he was just stressed from work. Emily found it odd how her mother, once so close to her, now seemed to side with Mark in every argument. There was one night that Emily would never forget. She woke up around midnight and realized Mark was not in bed. She walked downstairs and found the lights in the living room dimly glowing. She stood silently at the corner, watching. There they were, Mark and Linda sitting together on the couch. They weren't touching, but the closeness between them felt intimate, almost secretive. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their faces told enough. Linda was smiling softly, and Mark's expression was one Emily hadn't seen in months, gentle, affectionate, alive. She turned away before they noticed her, her stomach twisting in pain. The next morning, Emily acted as though nothing had happened. She prepared breakfast, spoke normally, and even kissed Mark goodbye as he left for work. But inside her, something broke. The woman who once believed in love and loyalty now saw the world differently. Her mind was filled with questions that had no answers. How long had this been happening? Did they plan it? Was it her fault for bringing her mother into their home? Emily began to watch everything more closely after that night. She noticed small gestures, a lingering look between them, a shared smile that wasn't meant for her to see. She started paying attention to times when they were alone together. Whenever she returned home early, they always seemed startled. Whenever she left, they looked relieved. It was no longer paranoia. It was pattern. She tried to confront the truth silently, telling herself to stay calm, but her heart beat faster every time she caught them sharing a glance. By then, Emily had begun to change. Her laughter disappeared, her appetite faded, and her once bright home became a place of quiet tension. She still cooked, cleaned, and went to work, but everything she did felt automatic. She was a ghost moving through her own life. Mark didn't notice or pretended not to. Linda, on the other hand, seemed almost indifferent, as though she had made peace with the lies she lived in. Then came the moment that confirmed Emily's worst fear. While doing laundry again, she found a note tucked inside one of Mark's pants pockets. It wasn't long, just a small piece of paper that read, "Last night was unforgettable." Her hands trembled as she held it. The handwriting wasn't Mark's, it was Linda's. Emily sat down on the floor, unable to breathe. Everything she had suspected, every uneasy feeling, every strange glance, it was all true. Her husband and her mother were betraying her under her own roof. The betrayal was so deep, so cruel, that she didn't even know how to react. She wanted to scream, cry, confront them both, but she couldn't move. She just sat there, staring at the note, feeling her world collapse piece by piece. In that moment, Emily realized her life would never be the same again. The people she loved most had destroyed everything she believed in. The warmth of her marriage and the comfort of her family were gone. What remained was silence, heavy, suffocating, and full of secrets. But deep down, beneath the pain, a new emotion began to grow. Not sadness, not anger, but a quiet determination. Emily decided she wouldn't confront them yet. She would find out everything first. She would uncover the truth completely before she made her next move. The morning after discovering the note, Emily felt hollow inside. She went through her daily routine as if she were moving through fog. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed poisonous. Every sound echoed too loudly: the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the stairs, the muffled voices from the living room. She avoided looking at either Mark or Linda directly, afraid that her face would betray what she knew. They behaved as though nothing had changed, laughing softly during breakfast, talking about meaningless things, pretending to be a normal family. But for Emily, nothing about them felt real anymore. At work, she could barely focus. She moved through the hospital corridors mechanically, her mind consumed by what she had found. The image of that note haunted her, the words, the handwriting, the betrayal it represented. She thought of the nights she had spent worrying about Mark working late, and how Linda would reassure her, telling her that he was loyal and hardworking. All those reassurances now felt cruelly calculated, part of a web spun around her while she trusted too easily. When she returned home that evening, she watched them closely. Mark greeted her casually, his voice flat, and Linda smiled warmly as though nothing had happened. It made Emily sick inside. She excused herself and went to her room, locking the door quietly behind her. For the first time, she began to cry. Not out of weakness, but because she knew she had to stay composed afterward. Once the tears stopped, she looked into the mirror and hardly recognized the reflection staring back at her. Her eyes looked tired, but there was something else in them now: resolve. Emily realized that confronting them without proof would change nothing. They would deny it, twist her words, and make her look paranoid. She needed evidence that couldn't be ignored. She began planning carefully, thinking about ways to catch them without alerting them. The idea of setting up cameras crossed her mind, but she hesitated at first. It felt wrong, invasive, yet what they had done was far worse. By the time she went to bed that night, she had made up her mind. She would find out everything, no matter how painful it might be. The next day, while Mark was at work and Linda was out shopping, Emily visited a small electronics store across town. She bought 2 discrete security cameras and a memory card, pretending they were for general home safety. Her hands trembled slightly when she paid for them, knowing what she was about to do. That evening, while everyone slept, she quietly installed one camera in the living room bookshelf facing the couch and another near the hallway, angled toward the stairs. She hid the devices carefully, ensuring no one could spot them. Her heart pounded the entire time, but she didn't stop. Days passed slowly after that. Emily forced herself to act normal, pretending she was still the same trusting wife and daughter. She smiled when expected, cooked dinner, and even joked occasionally, masking the growing darkness inside her. At night, when Mark fell asleep beside her, she would sneak out and check the footage. The first few days showed nothing unusual. They behaved cautiously, never crossing lines when she was around. But then, one night she saw something that confirmed her worst fears. It started innocently, Linda and Mark sitting on the couch, drinking wine, talking softly. Then Linda placed her hand on his arm and he didn't move it away. They sat like that for a long time, their faces closed, their voices low. It wasn't what she saw that hurt the most. It was how comfortable they looked together, as though they had done it many times before. Emily paused the video, her hands shaking. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The truth was no longer a suspicion, it was real, captured in digital silence. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake beside Mark, watching him breathe peacefully, wondering how he could live such a lie without guilt. Every beat of his heart beside her felt like an insult. She thought of Linda sleeping just down the hall, her mother, the woman who had once rocked her to sleep as a child, now betraying her in the most unforgivable way. The weight of it all crushed her, but she refused to break. She had endured too much to fall apart now. Over the next week, Emily collected more footage, building a silent archive of betrayal. Every clip she saved deepened her disgust, yet she couldn't stop watching. She needed to understand the full extent of what they had done. She wanted to see how far their deceit went. She began documenting everything, the dates, the times, their behavior when she wasn't around. She kept a small notebook hidden in her closet, recording every detail. It became her secret weapon, a record of truth against the lies that filled her house. Mark started to notice her distant behavior. He asked if something was wrong, but she only smiled faintly and said she was tired. Linda, too, grew cautious, watching Emily closely as though sensing the shift. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Meals were eaten in silence, footsteps sounded heavier, and even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Emily could feel the tension wrapping around her like a trap, but she didn't let it show. She needed to wait for the right moment to expose them both. One afternoon, she pretended to leave for work early, but parked her car a few blocks away and returned quietly on foot. She entered the house through the back door and stood in the kitchen, listening. From the living room came soft laughter, that same laughter she had heard so many nights before. Emily's heart raced as she crept closer. Through the small crack between the door and the wall, she saw them again, Mark and Linda on the couch, sitting far too close, their hands brushing. It was all she could do not to burst into the room, but she held back, frozen in place, her body trembling with anger. When she finally left the house that day, her decision was made. She wouldn't just expose them, she would make sure their betrayal destroyed them the same way it had destroyed her. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she would find a way. The next day, she took the footage and made copies, saving them on a separate drive she hid in her locker at work. It was her insurance policy. That evening, Mark mentioned going on a short business trip. Emily knew he was lying. She had checked his schedule earlier that day and found nothing planned. She smiled and encouraged him to go, pretending not to suspect anything. Once he left, she turned her attention to Linda, who seemed restless and distracted. Emily's heart hardened. Whatever love she had once felt for her mother had turned to something unrecognizable, not quite hate, but something close. Later that night, Emily reviewed the latest recordings. There, on the screen, was the final confirmation she didn't even know she was waiting for. The two of them together again, this time with no hesitation, no guilt. They looked happy, comfortable, almost proud of their secret world. Emily closed her laptop and sat still for a long time, her expression calm but her eyes filled with quiet fury. The betrayal was complete. There was nothing left to doubt, nothing left to save. Her marriage was a lie, her family a cruel illusion. But Emily didn't cry anymore. She didn't rage or collapse. She simply sat there in silence, her mind already working on what came next. She would not confront them in anger. She would destroy them with truth, cold, undeniable truth. And when she was done, she would walk away without a word, leaving them to face the wreckage they had created. The footage on Emily's hidden drive had become a quiet ledger of betrayal, each clip a small, sharp proof that cut deeper than any accusation. She watched them again and again, not to relive the pain, but to map the pattern. Small moments repeated themselves. A touch at night, a shared laugh at breakfast, the way Mark checked the doorway before speaking with Linda. Those moments, when strung together, formed a story that could not be denied. Emily knew she had to turn that story into something irreversible. She had to move beyond private hurt into a place where the law and public truth could not be bent by excuses or charm. She began with the practical. Emily arranged a meeting with a lawyer under the plain pretense of updating her will and asking general questions. The lawyer's office smelled of coffee and paper, and the conversation was clinical and deliberate. Emily explained nothing of her motives in the waiting room. She let the attorney guide the steps that would protect her. She learned how to preserve digital evidence properly, what chain of custody meant, and how photographs and time-stamped recordings could be authenticated. The lawyer advised her to make multiple backups, to store copies off-site, and to avoid touching the original devices. Emily left with a list of technical steps and a sense of armor she had not felt since the note tucked in Mark's pocket had revealed the truth. Money was the other battlefield. Emily had always believed in openness around bills and accounts. The idea of secrets hidden inside spreadsheets had never occurred to her as a danger until then. While sorting through tax papers and company statements late one night, she noticed small withdrawals and odd invoices tied to Mark's construction clients. The numbers looked wrong. Payments labeled for materials that were never delivered. Transfers to private accounts with no clear purpose. Suspicion pushed her further and she dug deeper. What she found was a trail of money leading to a small account under Linda's name. The sums were not massive, but they were deliberate and recurring. A pattern of theft hid beneath the image of family harmony. That discovery changed everything. Betrayal at the level of intimacy was terrible, but theft added a new kind of cruelty. It showed motive and planning. It suggested greed and partnership beyond the bedroom. Emily copied bank statements and printed invoices, then photographed every page and uploaded the images to a secure cloud account accessible only to her. She labeled each file with dates and short notes, building a paper trail that matched the video evidence. This time she was not merely an injured woman. She was a collector of facts, a recorder of crimes. The presence of proof gave her cold reassurance. She was methodical, precise, almost clinical in the way she prepared. When the first anonymous tip reached a local investigative journalist, the story opened like a cut. The reporter, who often chased political scandals and business fraud, smelled a bigger story, not just a marital collapse, but a case where personal betrayal intersected with financial wrongdoing. He contacted sources, checked records, and within a few days an article appeared online. The headline made the neighbors look twice as they stepped out to check their mail. The article was careful with names, but blunt about the facts it could verify: suspicious transfers, missing invoices, and the suggestion that a local business was at risk. Mark's clients began to ask questions. One contractor called and asked for an audit. Another canceled a meeting. The ripple effect moved faster than Emily expected. Mark sensed the tide turning. He grew restless and sharp-edged in ways Emily had not seen before. He checked his phone more often, scanned his inbox, and tried to control every conversation that might reach clients. He canceled projects and lied about delays. Some of his subcontractors pulled back without stating a reason. Emily watched him, waiting to see how he would respond when the scandal focused on him directly. She had no desire to savor his loss, only to see justice take shape. But his reaction was not the only consequence. Linda, who had once smiled in the kitchen as if guilty pleasures were her right, became increasingly secretive and frightened. The woman who had arrived needing a shoulder now needed protection from exposure. The stress pushed Mark toward desperation. He hired a private investigator with a steady look and a discreet card. The investigator was practical and silent, skilled at tracing sources and watching for loose ends. Within days, the investigator's attention shifted toward Emily. A different story began to form in Mark's mind, one where his wife, hurt and suspicious, might be the author of false evidence. He presented the possibility as plausible. A woman scorned could manufacture scandal. The investigator probed Emily's routine, watched her from a distance, and tried to find anything unusual. He followed her to the hospital and noted the time she arrived and left. He waited outside the house and watched how she moved through the rooms. For the first time, Emily felt the shape of danger ring around her like a second layer of betrayal. She responded as she had planned. Emily did not confront the investigator, and she did not flinch when she noticed the unfamiliar car idling near the grocery store. Instead, she used the surveillance she had carefully preserved. She presented the layer with a sealed package containing original devices, a verified copy of the footage, bank statements, and a written list of witnesses and dates. The lawyer arranged for a forensic technician to examine the files. Metadata confirmed timestamps, and the technician's report added weight that could not be dismissed as manipulation. Emily watched as neutral experts turned her pain into rock-solid proof. Then the twist came when Emily accessed one of Mark's old email folders while searching for invoices. Buried under innocuous messages was a string of emails between Mark and a business associate that referenced a plan to liquidate assets quietly and to start fresh. The messages predated Linda's move into the house by months. They revealed that Mark had been considering disappearing from the marriage long before Emily found the note. The emails also mentioned Linda by a nickname Emily had never heard spoken in family rooms, suggesting the relationship had roots that stretched back farther than she had imagined. It was evidence not only of recent betrayal, but of long-term conspiracy. The affair was not an accident of loneliness. It had been planned. This knowledge altered Emily's perception of the past. Moments that once seemed like small shifts became pieces of a premeditated plan. The bracelet receipt, the perfume, the late-night laughter, no longer isolated slips, but proof of a deliberate drift away from her. The combination of emotional betrayal and documents showing financial manipulation tightened a net around Mark and Linda that could not be unraveled by charm or denial. Emily felt a cold satisfaction at the discovery, not out of cruelty, but as a confirmation that she had been right to prepare. At night, Emily would sit in the dark of her room and breathe slowly, listening to the house that had housed so many lies. She no longer felt like a victim who needed to plead her case to people who might not listen. She had built an argument with facts, and those facts carried weight. The world outside the walls had already begun to respond. Clients left, a reporter pushed for more, and legal counsel prepared formal steps. Inside, however, the quiet before the storm settled over her like frost. She had more to do, more records to secure, and more witnesses to identify. The next move would demand courage and care. The net she had woven now needed to be pulled tight, and she intended to see it close without a single moment of theatrics. The truth would be the hammer, measured and steady, and when it fell, there would be no place for apologies to mend what had been destroyed. The days after the discovery were filled with silence and confusion. Lavra barely spoke, her eyes empty as she moved around the house like a stranger. The walls that once held laughter now felt cold, almost mocking her with memories she wished to erase. Every sound reminded her of what had happened, the scent of her mother's perfume lingering in the hallway, the faint echo of footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of David's voice still whispering in her mind. The betrayal was too deep to comprehend. She couldn't sleep without replaying that horrifying image of her husband and her mother together. It wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker, something that tore at her identity and left her questioning every memory of love she'd ever known. Lavra left the house one morning without saying a word. She drove aimlessly through empty streets until she reached a park where she and her husband had once picnicked. Sitting there, she felt like a ghost among the living. Children played, couples walked hand in hand, and yet none of it felt real to her anymore. She was trapped in her own mind, haunted by the thought that two people she loved most had hidden such a vile secret right under her roof. She wanted answers, but more than that, she wanted justice not from the law, but from her own sense of betrayal. Her mother, Evelyn, tried to call her repeatedly, but Lavar ignored every attempt. The older woman sent messages filled with apologies and excuses, but Lavra refused to read them. She blocked her mother's number and avoided her hometown entirely. Meanwhile, David stayed in the house, acting as if things could somehow return to normal, but normal no longer existed. The neighbors noticed the tension. Whispers began spreading that something was wrong in their once perfect marriage. Lavra could feel their eyes on her whenever she stepped outside. Weeks passed, but the pain didn't fade, it deepened. Lavra began to notice small things that made her wonder if the affair had started long before she suspected. Old photos of family gatherings showed David standing too close to Evelyn. Text messages that once seemed harmless now read differently when she looked back. She found an old receipt for a hotel room near her mother's town, dated months before the night she caught them together. Every discovery was another knife to the heart. The rage that had once turned to numbness began to grow again, stronger this time. Lavra stopped crying. She stopped trembling. Something inside her hardened. One night, as she sat alone at the kitchen table, she stared at the same wineglass her husband had once poured for her mother. The memory filled her with disgust. She realized she couldn't keep living with that weight pressing on her. Something had to change. She began documenting everything: messages, receipts, photos. She wanted proof, not to expose them publicly, but to remind herself that she hadn't imagined any of it. It was real. The betrayal was real. She collected each piece of evidence and stored it in a box labeled only with the word truth. The act gave her a strange sense of control, as if organizing the chaos could somehow help her rebuild herself. But as she did, she started noticing inconsistencies in what she remembered. Dates didn't always align. David's work trips matched up suspiciously well with times her mother claimed to be away visiting friends. The deeper she looked, the more she realized how long she had been deceived. One evening, David came home to find Lavra sitting at the table, the box in front of her. He froze when he saw it. The silence between them was suffocating. Lavra didn't yell or cry. She simply stared, her eyes empty but sharp. David tried to speak, but she raised her hand and he stopped. There was no need for words. Everything was already said in the evidence spread before him. The following morning, Lavra disappeared. Her car was found near a river, but there was no sign of her. Police believed she might have driven into the water, though no body was recovered. David reported her missing, crying during interviews and begging for her return. The media picked up the story of the vanished wife, painting him as a heartbroken husband. Evelyn appeared on television too, portraying herself as a devastated mother desperate for answers. But those who knew the truth behind closed doors remained silent, afraid to speak of what had really happened. Days turned into weeks, and Laura's disappearance became a mystery that gripped the town. Rumors circulated wildly. Some said she had taken her own life, others whispered that she had fled to start over somewhere far away. Only one person, however, knew that Lavra was still alive. She had checked into a motel under a false name 2 towns over, watching the news reports about her disappearance with cold detachment. Seeing David and Evelyn pretend to mourn her filled her with a chilling kind of satisfaction. For the first time, she felt she had power over them. Lavra began to plan her next move carefully. She wasn't done with them yet. She couldn't move on until they felt the same fear, the same helplessness, that she had lived through for months. She waited until the media frenzy quieted down before making her first move. She sent David a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photo, one she had taken secretly months earlier of him and Evelyn together, asleep. On the back she had written one line in red ink: "I'm not gone." When David opened the letter, panic spread across his face. He locked himself inside the house, terrified that Lavra might return. Evelyn tried to calm him, but she too began receiving strange messages, photos, receipts, and reminders of the affair they thought was buried. Each day, a new envelope arrived, each one darker than the last. Lavra had vanished from the world's eyes, but in secret, she had become something else entirely, an unseen force haunting their every moment. What began as heartbreak had turned into a slow, calculated act of revenge. And as David and Evelyn's sanity began to unravel under the weight of fear, Laura's story was far from over. The real punishment was only beginning. The house that once symbolized love had turned into a prison of fear. David no longer slept through the night. He kept every door locked, every window covered, and every light on, but the fear still crept in. He could feel Laura's presence in every shadow, every sound of wind against the glass. He stopped going to work, afraid to leave the safety of his home, if it could still be called that. Evelyn visited often at first, but soon even she started to avoid the place. She claimed she felt something unnatural there, something that didn't belong. But guilt has a way of haunting people, and for both of them, guilt was now their constant companion. Letters continued to arrive. Some contained photographs of David and Evelyn together from years ago, photos Lavra couldn't possibly have taken. Others were filled with cryptic notes, things only Lavra could have known. One envelope had strands of Evelyn's hair taped inside. Another had David's missing cufflink, the one he'd lost on a night he spent with her mother. The police dismissed it all as the work of a cruel prankster, but David knew better. He recognized Laura's handwriting, her sharp, neat script. She was alive, and she wanted them to suffer. Evelyn grew paranoid. She started sleeping with her phone clutched to her chest and avoided mirrors after dark. Her nerves were shredded, and her health began to decline. People in town whispered that she looked haunted, her once perfect image replaced by dark circles and trembling hands. She confessed to a friend that she could hear Laura's voice when she was alone, though she knew Lavra wasn't really there. Every ring of the phone, every creak in the floor made her heart race. She had betrayed her daughter, and now she believed her daughter's ghost was punishing her. David's descent was even faster. He stopped eating properly, drinking heavily to numb his fear. His home became a mess of bottles and torn papers. One morning he found a small package on his doorstep with no name, only a wax seal marked with an L. Inside he found a flash drive. When he plugged it into his computer, the screen lit up with video footage of him and Evelyn together, filmed secretly. Lavra had been watching all along, long before she ever confronted them. The realization shattered him. He fell to the floor, sobbing, unable to comprehend how much she had known. But what he didn't realize was that Lavra was closer than he thought. She had rented a small house less than a mile away, hidden behind thick trees, where she could see his windows from a distance. She watched every night through a long-lens camera, documenting his breakdown. To her, it was justice. To him, it was madness. She had become a ghost who walked among the living unseen but deeply felt. Weeks turned into months, and the pressure began to break Evelyn completely. One afternoon, neighbors saw her running barefoot down the street, screaming that she saw Lavra in the house. They tried to calm her down, but she collapsed before reaching the corner. At the hospital, she mumbled Laura's name over and over, terrified until her heart finally gave out. When news of her mother's death reached Lavra, she didn't cry. She simply stared at the wall for hours, her expression blank. It wasn't satisfaction or sadness, it was emptiness. The revenge she had planned for so long had consumed everything inside her, leaving nothing behind. David attended the funeral alone, hollow and pale. The whispers around him were relentless. Some said Evelyn died of guilt, others that Laura's ghost had taken her. He didn't deny either possibility. That night, when he returned home, he found one last letter on his bed. There was no stamp, meaning it had been delivered by hand. He opened it slowly, his fingers shaking. The note read, "You took my life the day you betrayed me. Now you'll live with what's left of yours?" There was no signature, but he didn't need one. He knew who it was from. After that night, no one saw David again. His house remained locked, lights off, mail piling at the door. The neighbors eventually called the police. When officers entered, they found the place in disarray. On the floor of the living room sat David's lifeless body. The cause of death was ruled a suicide. But what unsettled investigators most was what they found surrounding him: dozens of photographs of Lavra, all taken after her supposed disappearance. She was alive, staring directly at the camera in each one, as if she wanted him to see her before the end. When police tried to locate Lavra, they found nothing. The motel where she'd last stayed was empty, the room cleaned out, the name she had used belonging to no one. She had vanished again, but this time completely. Rumors spread quickly, turning the story into local legend. Some said Lavra had taken her own life after realizing what she'd done. Others believed she was still out there, living under a new identity, watching. Years later, the house remained unsold, its windows boarded and its yard overgrown. People claimed strange things happened there, lights flickering at night, faint sounds of crying, and sometimes the smell of perfume drifting through the hallways. Teenagers dared each other to break in, but most ran out screaming before reaching the second floor. Locals called it the Betrayal House, a place cursed by love turned to vengeance. But somewhere far away, in another quiet town, a woman named Layla rented a small apartment under a false name. She kept to herself, rarely speaking to neighbors. Her walls were bare, except for one photo, a picture of a river and the house she once called home. Sometimes she would sit by the window, watching the world move on, her eyes distant and unreadable. No one knew who she really was or what had brought her there. But at night she would whisper her old name to herself, just to remember it still existed. She thought about what she had done, about the lives destroyed by her vengeance. It had given her peace once, but now it felt like a wound that would never heal. She had won, but victory felt hollow. The people who betrayed her were gone, yet the pain remained, echoing endlessly. Some nights she dreamed of the life before everything fell apart, a life filled with laughter, warmth, and trust. But each morning, when she woke up, she remembered why she could never go back. Lavra had vanished from the eyes of the world, but her story lived on as a chilling reminder of what betrayal can do to a human heart. It started as love, turned into pain, and ended in darkness. No one truly knew if she ever found peace, or if she continued to wander, haunted by the ghosts of her own choices. But one thing was certain: her name, once whispered in sorrow, had become a legend of vengeance, loss, and the terrifying truth that sometimes love's greatest betrayal comes from those closest to home.